We're going to show you how to spool some reels today, both with monofilament line, such as this one, and of course braided line, and how to actually do it correctly. Again, it's something it's a really simple everyday thing that if you get it wrong can create more problems than you might realise. Get it right and it'll improve your fishing situation no end. Alright, so Andrew's just tied the line to the spool using a uni knot, 4-turn uni knot, and he's wrapped that line a couple of times around the spool before tying the knot to ensure that we get a nice secure bite onto the spool and we won't get any line movement. The other thing you'll notice that we're putting the spool on the ground with the label facing upward. The key factor is we need that line to be coming off the spool in an anti-clockwise direction. If you turn the spool over and the line comes off in a clockwise fashion, you'll find they're actually creating and putting a lot of twist into that line as it goes onto the reel, and it's going to give you problems. So what we want to do is create just enough pressure on that line to have it bed nicely on the spool. Andrew's are going to grip the line with his fingers before it comes onto the reel itself, and the reason we're doing that is that monofilament lines like this one, they have a lot of stretch in them. If we put that line on too tight, with that line stretched, over time that line's going to want to contract and compress on itself, and we can damage spools and damage our line. If the line goes on too loose, we have a situation where the line will in fact want to cut down into itself when it comes under pressure, and we can have gross problems casting with coils of line and knots coming off all over the place. If that line is burning your fingers, you're holding it too tight. Okay, obviously that reel was filled far too high than it needed to be. It was overfilled and the line just spewed off everywhere over the front. So we're actually stripping the line off now to get it back down to the acceptable and correct level. That's about perfect there. Braided fishing line is different to monofilament line in so many ways, but one of those that affects when spooling a reel is that the braided line doesn't have any stretch, and if it does, it's negligible. It can't really be felt by the human hand. Without that stretch there, braided fishing line can't bind or hold on to a fishing reel spool. So if we tie that braided line directly to the spool, then we can end up with a situation where the entire spool of braid turns independently of the spool. And we actually have had reels come in here to our service department with the complaint that the reel doesn't have any drag. And the reel itself is a brand new reel and it's absolutely faultless, but we have a situation where the client or the customer's been misinformed and the reel is filled directly full of braid, and unfortunately it just won't grip onto that metal spool. I have attached around about 1 metre of monofilament backing line. So I've tied that directly to our spool, just like you saw Andrew do earlier, but I've done a joining knot, which we'll show you also. This one happens to be called a Slim Beauty, joining my braided line to my monofilament.
Form a double overhand or double granny knot in the heavy leader and draw this partially tight. Pass the end of the main line through both loops of the double overhand as shown. Then wrap the main line around the leader 7 times going up and 7 times coming back, before pushing the tag through the loop above the double granny. Lubricate with saliva, pull the double overhand knot tight, then tighten the turns in the main line and snug them down. Pull firmly to test, then trim the tags.
So I haven't even completely covered the bottom of that spool with monofilament, but I do have the knot there. I do have the situation where the monofilament's bound onto that spool and we're not going to end up with any dramas. We can put the braid on with a lot more pressure. So rather than using just finger pressure as we did with the monofilament, we're actually using someone else to hold that spool of line and create the tension for us. Braided line differs again to the monofilament in that the diameter of it is so thin that if we don't put the braid on with some pressure, it will tend to cut down into itself on the spool, so we do need to apply significantly more pressure to the braided line than the monofilament when spooling. If you want to check your spool tension whilst you're doing it, stop anywhere during the spooling, use your fingernail or thumbnail and try to dig down into that braid. If your fingernail significantly digs down into the braid, or it's easier to compress, it feels spongy, then realistically you haven't got that braid tight enough. It needs to be tighter than that. You need to virtually not be able to dig a fingernail down inside it. I filled this spool up to a point which is slightly less than what I would have filled it up if it was the straight monofilament. You would have seen the monofilament spool before. This time I've filled it slightly lower, and the reason for that is braided fishing line, being so thin, doesn't deplete the level of the spool on a long cast quite as much as the monofilament line will. So A, it's going to maintain a better level, full level as we're casting, and B, by underfilling it just ever so slightly, it's another way that you can actually get more consistency out of your braid and less of those problems like wind knotting and issues on the cast. So just slightly lower level than you would with the monofilament, and it's another way to prevent having some problems.